us a little bit about your path to where you are today doing this work.
So Marie, it's a really sweet and important story for me. So I'm giving you so much fun to recount this because it really was a moment in time. So when I was in college, I was a theater minor and I was a government major, and I was sort of studying politics. And I specialized in Chinese theater. Like I was studying about how Chinese theater was used during the Chinese Revolution. And this whole idea of theater for change kind of conceptually was part of my thinking. Like when I was in college, though, I had founded the Black Theater Ensemble. So I was personally sort of acting, but it wasn't my major thing. I was going to be a government major and I thought I might be a lawyer, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, of course, graduating from college. So here's the big moment is that when I graduated with loans, with money that had to be paid back, I remember I grew up in Washington, D.C., and that there was this ad in the newspaper, and it said stage manager for a theater company. And I just remember my heart leaping, like, stage manager, ooh, I could get into the arts. And so I ended up, to shorten this part of the story, I found this connection with this company called Latinegro. And Latinegro was a component of something called the Latin American Youth Center, which was this outreach into the public schools using improvisational theater. And so what occurred was I had this interview with this guy named Quique Avilés. And in this moment, this is where diversity theater, everything kind of combined in my heart, because Quique said to me, he said, so I know he's a Salvadorian guy. He's like, I know you're from Washington, D.C., and you're a Black girl in Washington, D.C., but I don't know if you know anything about Latinos. You know anything about the story of Latinos in Washington, D.C.? And I said, no, not really. And so what occurred was I became a member of this theater company called Latinegro. And the purpose of Latinegro was to break the silos and break the gang wars between Latin American and African American youth in Washington, D.C. So I was in this company for 2 years as an artist, as a stage manager, as a person learning Spanish, as a person learning the Hispanic culture, learning in DC the Latin conflict and the African American conflict and how that turned. So I just had this deep, immersive experience being culturally out of my comfort zone. That's an important part of it. Like I was not comfortable working in the Latin American Youth Center. I was not in a place of power. I was in a place of actually being the non-dominant group. I didn't know the language, and using drama, which is what we learned to do, broke down all the walls.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that was 22 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, that was pivotal, central, everything. And so the journey coming from Latinegro in a community center experience, I then found like this workshop, an improv workshop in DC. I started doing improv, like comedy improv. And then one of the members of this comedy improv thing, have you ever heard of something called playback theater? And I had never heard of playback theater, didn't know anything what she was talking about. And she said, well, we're standing up a new theater company, come on to this rehearsal. So I went to this rehearsal with playback theater. And at this juncture, it was all white people and me, which is so important to the story, is that I was like a 23, maybe 24-year-old African American girl. Everybody was like, I thought they were 80 and they were probably 30 and 40 and 50, right? But I was like, oh, they're so old. And what is this all about? But there was something about playback, which was, we started talking about our personal stories and playing them back to each other. So that this experience of all of a sudden feeling like theater from a deeply personal place, this is where the personal and the political started to get even stronger. So when I was doing Latinegro, it was very much political, right? And it was personal and political, but we were doing anti-AIDS work, we were doing education work, we were doing anti-gang work. It was very visceral, kind of like subject matter specific, I guess is what I would say. But in playback, this was just a very soft experience of telling each other stories. And my heart just started to really heal in many ways through this process. And once playback, I don't know how much detail by story, but because I got into playback, the people in playback were also what was called psychodramatists. So then this became a story between the playback people were basically theater artists, but the psychodramatists were therapists. And again, I'd never heard about psychodrama. Well, I got accepted into St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital to become a psychodramatist. And then I got all these years of training in psychodrama, again, using theater now really from a mental health standpoint. And then coming out of St. Elizabeth's, my boss recommended me to a corporate company who was doing psychodrama in the corporate world. And so all this to say, I moved from mental health into business at that time. So now I'm about 27 years old, and I start working for companies like Booz Allen doing sexual harassment and Fannie Mae doing diversity work. And so it's sort of this evolving, this was a big juncture again. So it was like improv on the streets. Then I went into therapy, and now I'm in corporate world. And then I had all of this adjustment about, oh, could I make money doing this? Is that okay?